and he's 5 years old and comes home from preschool. He's like, "Hey, Dad, I'm getting picked on, punched by a kid at school." I'm like, "What? Who's punching you? What's going on?" So he gives in the story. He leaves one fact out, and I'm saying, "Look, you have to defend yourself, and you got to warn the kid once not to do it. If he does it again, you get more stern, and you tell him what the consequences are going to be." And I said, "Connor, if he keeps hitting you, you hit him back as hard as you can. You do not get pushed around by a bully." And he goes, "Well, Dad, I'm 5 years old now." I'm like, "I know you're 5, and this is something we should have a conversation about." "Yeah, but the kid picking on me is 3 years old, and he's like 4 inches shorter than me." I'm like, "Whoa, wait, don't do that."
Stop.
What the hell did I just do? It was horrible parenting. And then I'm like, "You didn't tell me he's 3 years old." "I know, but well, he's 3 years old. How much damage can he do to you? Just shove him away a little, gently push him away, and you tell him to go away. Like, what are you going to do?" So like that instance, now I ask more questions before I give advice when it comes to those kind of scenarios.
Hello and welcome to the Disrupt the Everyday podcast. We're here to help you navigate life while disrupting the status quo. Our discussions cover a number of topics relevant to everyday life. We discuss everything from relationships to entrepreneurship. We also engage in some difficult but important conversations. And now, here are your hosts, Brian and Tanya Hamilton.
Welcome to another episode of the Disrupt the Everyday podcast. Today we're going to be talking about parenting, specifically the angle of a first-time father. And we're joined today by Kendall Smith. Kendall, thanks for joining us today.
Brian, Tanya, thanks for having me on. Pleasure to be here, and great to be talking to you tonight.
Likewise. Mm-hmm. All right, well, let's just start off by learning about you, Kendall. So the question that we like to ask every guest that joins us on the podcast, the who is question. So who is Kendall Smith?
Sure. So I'm the author of Rookie Father. It's a playbook for men who are brand new to fatherhood, and there's a lot of meanings behind that. I've been an author for years, predominantly self-publishing in the past, and then I changed gears when I became a dad. And what I learned then, and what I still feel is so critical now, is that a child, it's a new story, it's a new start, and it's a new slate on your life. And when you go through and into the process of becoming a parent, it's so important to keep that in mind, because you're not going to know all the tricks. There's a lot of tips and a lot of things you have to learn. You're basically a student all over again. And what I try to bring in Rookie Father, which is my new book published by Familius Publishing, is that I break down the content and the advice in small bite-sized pieces, 1 to 2 pages, and it's a 132 chapter book. So it's easy to get in, get out, get what you want out of it. And it's all based on real and actionable advice that I've learned over the years as a parent. And then as a child growing up without a father myself, which is kind of one of the angles of the book that kind of outlays, if you were raised in absence of a father, here are some advice, here's some tips and advice you can use to give yourself a jump start in the world of fatherhood.
Awesome. Now, Kendall, I'm curious, just based on the book itself, I'm just kind of curious, what was the inspiration? Was that, not having a reliable or dependable father figure, was that part of your story? Is that why you wrote the book?
Yeah. I mean, I was honestly sitting there. My son was 1.5 years old at that time. And I just thought, I think my next writing project, and shifting from fiction, I decided I want to try something new. And I thought, well, what can I bring to the story that hasn't really been told? What is a book out there that hasn't hit the market? And I just focused on what kind of advice could I give for people that weren't raised in absence of a father. My parents separated when I was 6, divorced when I was 9. And that really had a major impact on my life, which is an understatement for any child who goes through that. But through that lens, what can you do as a parent to give your children a better chance, better opportunity, a more stable household, more loving relationship? And that kind of led into, what kind of tips can I give about marriage? What kind of tips can I give about the financial advice, which is a hobby and a passion of mine? Basic block and tackle investment strategies. And then it kind of expanded to, well, one thing you're not exposed to when you have 2 married parents is the inter-family dynamics between in-laws, which is the biggest blind spot for anyone that gets married and goes, well, what are these in-laws doing? Like, what's going on here? Like, people tell you, well, you're not only marrying your wife, you're marrying her family. I'm like, what the heck does that mean? I learned real quick what that meant. And I got a lot of just advice that I kind of developed myself and advice that I was given that I packaged in this book. So it's a kind of full spectrum in terms of advice that I give.
Now, in terms of that in-law experience, I know the one thing that, I kind of had to adjust to, I'm sure both of us had to adjust to, was just coming from two different households. And, when you grow up in a household, you have all of these just assumptions. You think people do things the same way. And those can be points of contention if you're not careful. Even simple things like where the ketchup goes, where the syrup goes, whether it goes in the fridge or whether it goes in the cupboard, like just simple things like that. It sometimes create any unique challenges. Was that kind of your experience as well? Was there anything that kind of stood out to you? Just kind of trying to blend two different households and form your own family.
Well, it's funny. I read, I went into your website. I think you had 4 children.
That's correct. Yeah.
And you got the dog. I saw that. I just thought, when it comes to in-laws, you guys are in the best spot. You outnumber any other in-law party you run into. So you can walk in that room, probably be like, yeah, wherever you want your ketchup to go. I've got 4 kids. The ketchup won't end up in the living room. It'll probably end up in the kitchen, and you deal with it because you can outnumber them. But for me, the thing about the in-laws I realize is that what you picture in your mind is the perfect father-in-law, father to your wife, brother, sister, nieces and nephews. What you picture in your mind doesn't translate. It is always quirks and blind spots and things that will surprise you. And the thing I keep in mind is to keep an open mind. And the advice I give is that, when the child is born, whatever, even in your own family, if you have a rivalry with a brother, or you have a strained relationship with your sister, or maybe your parents divorced and you have a better relationship with one parent than another, it's like, it's time to heal and come together. It's just time to bring the family back, let bygones be bygones. And then, speaking on behalf of your child, there'll be incidents. I have a chapter called The Drunk Uncle, which is a nod of respect to Saturday Night Live and that character, in that your uncle gets out of line. If it's I don't care if it's your brother-in-law or your brother, like, you have got to pull him aside at a certain age. And if he's really not behaving well, you have to have a heart-to-heart with him and say, look, I'm a dad. I'm not going to tolerate this kind of behavior. And for certain behaviors, if it's alcohol or drug abuse, then it's a whole other category. But I'm talking about dropping the F-bomb at Thanksgiving. Like, no, like, that stops now, or we're going to have a big problem. And that block and tackle has to take place. But at the same time, it's the birth of a child is a great way to heal all wounds.
Yeah. Yeah, I do agree with that. Right. And it's one of those, you may not have spoken to people for a long time, but it's true. It's that or death, right? I find are the two main life situations that can really bring people together. And sometimes, obviously, tear people apart, but a good opportunity. So I have a question just around just family life in general. In today's day, I know you're in the States, we're in Canada, pretty much the same. But what's your view on family life in North America today?
In North America, it's a very broad question, but a good one. I think that, and there's a big distinction between Canada and the U.S. The U.S. has never been this polarized in decades, since the 60s, since the Vietnam War. And a lot of families have had friction, a lot. People that go to one side of the political spectrum and the other. And it's almost like politics has infiltrated the dining room or the living room, where people talk and they have conversations, and people will scratch their heads at each other. Like, can't you see this point of view? It's like, no, you're a nut job. What's wrong with you? And it doesn't matter what side of the spectrum. But at the same time, I think that's going on. But I also think that the millennial generation and Gen Z that's coming up, millennials going from age 25 now to about 40, and then Gen Z's from 12 years old and growing up. I think that millennials are doing more to kind of bring back the family and take a much more, they're prioritizing family above career. And in most companies I work for, and I do actually recommend this in the book, when you go and you get a new baby enters your home and you're a new dad, and then all of a sudden you look at that paycheck you earn. And it's like, oh, well, we got to find another $2,000 a month or something crazy like that. And you may start looking for a job. And when you do, you better ask the question, is your company a family-friendly environment? And then listen intently. You want to have that work-life balance. It's more important than ever. I think millennials are pushing that. And I can see it in how employers operate and how they attract talent. So I'm in the long term, my hope and I'm praying that divorce itself diminishes into the background and is less and less common. It was full blown in the 70s and 80s. It was horrific. Mm-hmm. And I'm seeing that less now as an adult. And I still like cringe when I hear about families breaking apart. It breaks my heart. But I think long term, we have reason to be optimistic.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think over this pandemic, like just even personally knowing couples that, it wasn't just the pandemic that caused the divorce. I feel like, there were things going on before, and then that just, made everything sort of come to a screeching halt there. But what do you think just in research and stuff over the last couple of years?
I think this is the two crazy observations with the pandemic. It was a litmus test for every marriage. Every marriage was tested. And if something hit a wound with you, or it just like hit a nerve, and you didn't work through it, and you weren't flexible, you were in a probably worse spot. But I think the families that survived it, and I almost say parents like today, you think about the baby boomers when they had kids, young Gen Xers that where their kids are maybe in college now. They didn't have 3 and 4-year-olds running around the house during COVID. I think you have a 5-year-old child. Is your youngest 5 years old now, or is he a little older?
6 now.
Yeah, 6 now, yeah.
So you're in the thick of it. Like you're literally 4 kids at home. I mean, anyone that went through that, it was a litmus test of how you can manage this. And we never get credit. We never get pat on the back. I want to go to every baby boomer in my town and say, dudes, you did not deal with what we had to deal with. We had it tougher than you. And that always sets them off. Sets them off. They go nuts. The other thing is I think the pandemic brought the father back into the household.
Mm-hmm. That I agree with. Commuting,
traveling for business, going into the office, the time away. And now, boom, you're with your kids. And now you talk to parents that have to go in, some have to go in 5 days a week, and they resent it. They really they want to be around with their families. The men, today's generation of parents have had more time with their kids. And I did an article about this. They've had more time with their kids than any generation going back until right before the industrial era.
Yeah.
Because back then, industry came to life. You're working 7 days a week. There was no time off. There's no labor laws. And now it's like 120 years later, here we are. And I think it actually has done a lot of good for families. That's a long-winded answer, so I apologize.
No. I like that. And even just in regards to when I say co-parenting, I don't mean divorce, but like parenting within the home, right? Like all those, all the duties and all that kind of stuff. When you have 2 people working outside of the home, it also has to get done. Right? It's just going to be like, okay, whoever gets home first, you're making dinner. Right. And then at least now it's like, there were so many times during, the pandemic of the kids are online and this, that, and the next thing is like, oh, you have a break from your meeting. Okay. Can you help with this? Can you help with that? Right. Almost getting that dependency on the opposite parent, where before it was like, okay, well, I know he's not going to be home till like 6:30, so I'm on my own to do dinner and extracurriculars, right? So definitely agree with what you're saying there.
Yeah, I think it's provided the means for spouses to appreciate each other a little more. As insane as that is, like COVID was so insane, came out of nowhere. I mean, there's I don't know. It was just a crazy experience. And, but if we can keep that going, I think you can't take it back. Like, unless you're going back to work full time, if you're working from home 2 days a week, you're doing something, you're picking up the kids, or you're making a meal, or just even straightening up, taking out the garbage, like just little things around the house. And it provides the opportunity to establish equality, which is another big thing of mine. When I talk to moms, I talked to a mom podcaster the other week, and the mom's angle is like, well, what do you think of husbands and the kids? I'm like, I promote equality. Like, I'm not trying to like shove these jobs on you, and I do the male things. Like, it's more equality now than ever, and that should be the case. And like, oh yeah, I totally agree, and I think it's a good goal to aim for.
Now, just in terms of, I guess, your philosophy or your development as a father, again, just coming from your background, because I'm sure anybody who's watching or listening to this discussion, there's going to be folks who kind of came up the same way, maybe without that father figure in the house every day. Was there anybody in your life who you kind of looked at as a model for fatherhood, and or like how did you really develop that thought process that's involved with being a father?
Yeah, I took anything I could get. So I looked at my friends' fathers, the good and the bad, because the one thing I looked for was when my father, probably I was around 8 years old, I started picking up on cues. Like, how does like a boy turn into like a dad? Like, that was fascinating to me. But I also looked at how they interacted with their kids, and I had good examples and bad examples. I just made mental notes. I've been making mental notes since 8 years old, like thinking about things. And then, and I recommend this in Rookie Father as well, is like, if there were television co-stars, movie stars, father figures in those shows that inspired you, there's no reason not to espouse them. If something resonated with you, and I'll share two with you. One was Lawrence Fishburne, Boys in the Hood. Any boy can make a baby, but it takes a man to raise a son. And that, I was in the theater, 20 years old, and I heard that. I was like, oh man, like that's gonna stick. Like, that really hit me. And I was like, damn, that was so good. And I'm like, I'm gonna keep that. So I've been doing these little things. Cliff Huxtable, Bill Cosby is not in the book for obvious reasons. We edited him out, I'll tell you that. He's gone. Literally, he's like, hey, Kendall, you can't put Bill Cosby in the book. I know I can't, but he was a big part. Find someone else. Fine. But Cliff Huxtable, what a perfect dad. Perfect in my mind. This guy was funny, and he was direct, and he was intelligent, successful. This is the dude. Like, I want to be this guy. Literally. I'm like, and that's what I found. The other thing I found is like not father related, but I'm a big cinephile. I love movies. I love all different kinds of movies. And then there was the movie. It was about Truman, and the character Gary Sinise plays the role. And the line that he cites that Truman used to say was, "Ingratitude is a cardinal sin." I'm like, I like that. That's so true. Like, not to be true to who you are, not being grateful. So I picked that up. So all these little things kind of added up to the book, is my whole point. But you can find inspiration anywhere, and including your mother, aunt, I don't care. Like, you can espouse those values if they're important to you.
So what do you say, when you're talking to people, because, we all have different experiences growing up, like seeing really healthy relationships at home, really appreciating and valuing parents and stuff like that. But also at the same time, I believe that it's important to really find your own way too. Right. Mm-hmm. So for me as a wife and as a mother, right. And it's taking, like, I guess, the good, the bad, and everything in between, and taking that and also creating your own. What do you think about that?
I think it's a great philosophy. Mm-hmm. I think it's fantastic. I think you have to learn from your mistakes. Mm-hmm. And what you think is the best applicable solution, you may find was not. And I had an example where my son came home. He was in preschool, and we kept him back a year because he's a boy. Because boys need that extra year to mature, and that's what all the studies say. And we agreed to it, and we did it, and we have no regrets. And he's 5 years old, and he comes home from preschool. He's like, "Hey, Dad, I'm getting picked on, punched by a kid at school." I'm like, "What? Who's punching you? What's going on?" So he gives in the story. He leaves one fact out, and I'm saying, "Look, you have to defend yourself, and you got to warn the kid once not to do it. If he does it again, you get more stern, and you tell him what the consequences are going to be." And I said, hey, Connor, if he keeps hitting you, you hit him back as hard as you can. You do not get pushed around by a bully. And he goes, well, Dad, I'm 5 years old now. I'm like, I know you're 5, and this is something we should have a conversation about. Yeah, but the kid picking on me is 3 years old, and he's like 4 inches shorter than me. I'm like, whoa, wait, don't do that.
Stop.
What the hell did I just do? Like, it's horrible parenting. And then I'm like, you didn't tell me he's 3 years old. I know, but well, he's 3 years old. How much damage can he do to you? Just shove him away a little, gently push him away, and tell him to go away. Like, what are you going to do? So like that instance, now I ask more questions before I give advice when it comes to those kind of scenarios.
Oh, man.
Yeah, that definitely could have ended badly. So good advice there.
It'd be horrible.
Now, going back to when before Connor was born, when you found out you were going to be a father, can you take us back to that moment? What was that like for you?
Well, I'll share with you. We're an adoptive family.
Oh, okay.
So we did not find out by well, to say the P stick. We didn't find out that way at all. We found out from a call from our adoption agency we worked through saying you've been chosen. Do you want to fly down and meet the birth parent? And that was like, yeah. And we went down to meet her, and it was so emotional and like stirring. And you make this connection. And in that scenario, it could be anywhere from 7 months ago to a week. It's all different varying levels. We had like 2 months. And so you're waiting until they're born. They have the right to change their mind. So you have that in the back of your head. Like, what's going to happen if this falls? What am I going to do? All worked out. The thing for me was when, and this is like finding out you're going to be a father. I found out it was official when the notary and lawyer were in with the birth mom signing off on the paperwork. And when they came out, I thought we had to wait 48 hours. And the attorney turns to me and says, by the way, it's official. She waived the 48 hours. You are officially parents right now. And it was like, I just melted. I was like, wow. Like all this time, all these things we went to go through. And it's just, it's solidified what I hoped would happen when I was 9 years old, which was or 6 years old. And that was, I'm going to promise myself, I promise my wife that I'm going to give this child, my son Connor, a much better experience growing up.
Wow.
Yeah.
What a story.
No, that's amazing. And I apologize because I didn't find that out in my research. So that brings a whole different dynamic. So again, because I know it sound like a broken record here, but there's people going through that whole experience too. Like, what was that whole adoption process like before the 2 months of lead time that you got? How long were you waiting to really find out that you were going to have a child? What's that process like? Yeah,
I'll tell you, it's you can imagine what we went through with all the procedures you could take to try to get pregnant, and I'll leave it at that. And it was about a 5-year journey altogether, and we pivoted to the adoption route. And I would just say, because a lot of parents today they're starting to have kids at an older age, you get past that 30 hump. I tell anyone that is open to the concept or having an open conversation is that if you're over 30 and you're a woman, and this applies directly to the woman, because the man sometimes, men have problems too, but when your chances of getting pregnant over the age of 30 diminish slightly and it continues to go down. It's just the science. You need a backup plan. And I tell everyone, investigate adoption, investigate the process, see how it works, talk to other adoptive families, go to some seminars, get a little research. It's worth it because at the end of the day, unlike Canada, the health benefits down here, we don't always pick up the tab when it comes to reproductive assistance. And that path gets more and more expensive and more steep and more emotionally draining. And adoption, when things get solidified, more often than not, it results in a united family. And it's worth exploring. It really is. It's even if it's against everything in your body, like I want to have my own kid, my own flesh and blood. Okay, well, whatever. Well, that's not going to happen. You better prepare yourself, and it's a good option, and it tests your marriage to some degree too. To get into that, it forces you out of your comfort zone, and it can end up making your marriage stronger.
That's interesting that you bring up the piece about marriage, because I was actually going to, my next question was going to be to ask, and even if you could just share, some encouragement, because during those 5 years, I don't know, but I can only begin to imagine how hard for individuals, and then as a couple, those years must have been. And don't know the stats, but I'm sure the divorce rate during those times increased for couples. So, do you have anything to say, any words of encouragement for anybody listening?
I would say communication is critical, being open and honest. I think going through that, therapy is not a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's certain trigger events that if you're in therapy beforehand, you're better prepared. And what I also tell people is that marriages have ups and downs, and there's the downside of not being able to have a child is excruciating. It really is, and to alleviate that, it's worth to invest the time as a couple for you to really think it through. And for the couples that don't make it, like maybe they weren't meant to be. I hate to say it. I mean, it's kind of cold, but like, if you can't go through those really tough times together, I'll tell you this: COVID came around, and COVID in comparison to those 5 years, that was a cakewalk. It was nothing. I mean, for the health of our marriage, we had friction, we had problems, but this was not like what would I call it? They were not DEFCON 3 conversations with your spouse. You're like, I'm gonna get the hell out of here. Where are you gonna go? Right? It wasn't like that. Yeah.
Okay. Fair. All right. No, awesome. Thank you for sharing all that. I'm gonna shift gears a little bit and talk some more about the book, because again, just sounds like just learning about you as we're having this conversation. I'm sure that the process of book writing, you've been taking mental notes since you were 8 years old, and also you interviewed some people for the book as well.
Yeah.
What were some of the things that those people brought to the table, or things that you learned from those individuals throughout that process?
Yeah. So I picked one couple and 2 individuals that I thought were exemplary in the field of parenting. The first was a gentleman named Dana Glazer, and he started doing documentaries, and he did a documentary about stay-home dads. And he really kind of revealed it because he was one. So he put this perspective on just the stereotype, the negativity associated with being a stay-at-home dad. And he wanted to confront it, but he was an exceptional parent. Comes from a great family, and he's a great role model because he's so expressive and communicative. And I'm like, I want to interview this guy who did this documentary. So I interviewed him, and he had his family history, and he gives his perspective about the value of dads playing a role in the house and how important that is, especially in a society where we have too many single parents in the States. We really do. The numbers are terrifying. Second person was a mentor of mine who is the publisher of, I worked at Condé Nast, and he was the publisher of Vanity Fair, a magazine we worked on called Cargo. He worked at New York Magazine, and he had the perfect work-life balance between being a solid father figure, always present, wise, great family history as well that we got into. And he was a workaholic, and he put it all together, and he always kept things going. And I was like, damn. This guy you never really saw him off kilter. And I got into like, well, how did you manage the weekend client events at department stores? He had to go to these department store events where his clients in the fashion industry were doing events with New York Magazine. He goes, I brought my kids with me. I'm like, really? He goes, yeah, I have them in the Bjorn walking around. How you doing? It's my son. It's like, that's pretty cool. And the last couple, I thought it was important, and not a respect to inclusivity, was I interviewed 2 same-sex dads. And I wanted to walk the reader through their journey as parents, their journey as gay men, and that process, where they felt comfortable with starting a family, and they have 3 kids. and they're in the burbs. They're, in the same county I'm in, and I just wanted to tell that story, to humanize that part of family, because I don't care what you define as family. If it's two parents, regardless of sex, gender, age, I don't care. If you're providing a loving environment, that's all that matters. And I wanted to illustrate that for readers that may not be familiar or comfortable. Let's just get past that. I want to help humanize that story for that part of society. And I think the chapter speaks for itself.
Okay, so my question is, I've, been out of the home working. I've been on mat leave here in Canada. We get a year and it's gone to 18 months. Yeah, you can share. You can,
nice.
If you can take the whole time, you can do whatever you want. Anyways, all those play groups that I went to, and all that kind of stuff. It was great. Every once in a while, you would see a dad show up, and he would look so out of place and so uncomfortable, but he was there, and I was like, "Hey, round of applause to you," right? Mm-hmm. But I find it's easy for women to do that self-help stuff, right? Whether it's, reading a book, whether it's meeting up with other women at these centers or moms groups and stuff like that. But still not that same support for men, for the dads out there. What are your thoughts in regards to that?
Well, the first thing that I made sure was clear with the publisher, and in the book itself, was I never refer to my book as a self-help book. It's for men, and men hate to ask for help. They hate it. And you think about before navigation for cars, and dad's driving there, and wife's like, you made a wrong turn. I didn't make a wrong turn. It's like a classic dad story. You get further and further lost because he won't ask for help, won't pull over. Go to the gas station. Where's Baker Street? Oh, all right. So we don't use the word help. I define this work as a playbook, and so it's different plays for different situations you could use and act on. The other challenge with self-help with men is, and this is my beef with self-help books in general for the male population, is you cannot write a self-help book for a guy where each chapter is 30 pages long. It's ridiculous. Guys don't care. They're not going to get that through it. They've got game scores, or they've got bets going on. They got friends texting. You got work. You got kids. They don't have time to get through 30 pages. So it's all short and succinct. And it's actually based on a book that I read by Harvey Mackey, a sales advice book. You ever heard of it, Brian?
Yes. Yep.
That book was the bomb. I loved that book. It was perfect. I was in sales just starting out. And the way he gave advice, just 2 pages. Some of it's just a 1-sentence piece of wisdom. A third of the book is as corny as hell. You read it, it's guy had his Target account on the inside of the brim of his fedora hat, and he would look at that every day. I'm going to close IBM. I'm like, what? Where did you come up with that? During the Korean War? What is that? Anyway, but that philosophy of how you dole out advice, small bits, is important. The other thing is, guys need to talk to other guys. I think millennials compared to boomers, and I'm a Gen Xer, but I don't know how, I think boomers just literally, they would 90% of the time rely on their wives to raise kids. I honestly believe that. They just were working so hard, so many hours. Millennials, I think, are more involved. They're more attuned. They're asking more questions. So again, I'm more optimistic about how fathers parent today compared to 1970. Mm-hmm. The 70s, I should say. I'm not that old.
Now, for the busy fathers, or maybe even single fathers, you talked a lot about the work-life balance, and one of the individuals who you spoke to who has that kind of who has that a pretty solid handle on that. What's some advice you could share with with us, just in terms of how we can really maintain that work-life balance, keep ourselves organized? What are some of the things that are useful? I'm always looking for hacks in this area, so I'm kind of asking selfishly, to be honest.
I just one of the first things I do in the book is I tell readers, excuse me, I got to tickle my throat. Sorry. With down more pipe. One one of the first things I do is I suggest that you look at the hours you work, your commute time, and 4 out of the 5 nights a week, you have to be home to see your kids before they go to bed. Base it on that. If you can't see them in the morning and you're commuting, it's fine. But the opportunity to be there every day at night and have an engaging part of and being engaged with your kids every single day, it builds a bond, it builds respect. And at work, if you can't handle the workload or it's too much, then when you become a dad, you have to have an honest conversation with your boss and say, there's too much on my plate. And for your manager, it's not your problem to solve on some level. They're the manager for a reason. So let them figure it out. And it's it has to be delivered in a very diplomatic way, but it's an important one because you can't sacrifice time with your family, not in this day and age. And I think if you start there, things will kind of get aligned. You'll figure out when you have to leave the office. You figure out, okay, if I had this situation on a trip to San Francisco where it's like, okay, I could stay overnight, and then if I do, I can get home by 7:00 the next day. So it's either an early AM flight, get home, see my kid, or I take the red eye, be miserable, get home, crash till noon. I'm like, I'm going to take the early morning flight. I took a 6 a.m. flight, so I had dinner with my family that night, going from San Francisco back to the New York airports.
And I think, ever since the pandemic, we're now in a position where if before people felt awkward or, that they could get in trouble at work for doing this type of thing, I think now people are feeling a lot more comfortable to be able to advocate for themselves and what it is they need and what's going on in their family. Right. So no better time than now for people to be able to do that, really. And for, bosses to be understanding that, like the job's getting done. It's actually probably going to be even better because I now have this time to do the other things I need, right? You're not going to be rushed, just little things like that. And it's all about, making it work for your schedule too. Right. So, you may not have a whole day. It's not about the length of time. It's just about putting that time aside. That's what we believe. Right. So maybe it's picking, somebody up from school after practice. Right. Like I know Brian does that a lot. He puts it in the schedule and that's like your one-on-one time, especially when you have more than one child. You're trying to, fit it in and have those conversations. And when they're all different ages, not necessarily conversations you can be having when the 6-year-old's around and stuff like that. So, that's worked for us so far. And,
even to your original point there of just making sure that your employers understand, it's really an employee market right now. I've seen so many situations, either with my employer or association that I volunteer with, where people are just saying, they're not looking for a job unless it's remote, unless it's at least a hybrid environment where they can spend most of the time working from home. So it really gives you the opportunity to be able to do that. Like I did the math when I switched to working from home. It was saving me minimum 500 hours a year that I spent driving.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's insane. I mean, and you can make the case too. It's like, hey, I know you need this job done. I know you need to be more productive. I come in the office 5 days a week. How about I give you 12 extra hours a week of labor? I know how to do it. Oh, how are you going to do that? I'm not going to come to the office. I'll come in 2 days a week or 1 day a week. I'll wake up at 8:30, get to work, end at 6:00. Hour and a half in the front, hour and a half in the back. You have leverage, and like it is like an employee's market for the time being, knock wood. But like I looked at, I don't know if you've been watching the news in the States about Twitter and the layoffs and Facebook and Amazon, and I feel bad for these employees, but I'll tell you, they'll be snatched up. The Twitter to go out in 6 months from now, if it stays the same, Twitter will not be able to replace that talent capital. It'll take them years to do it. And I think companies that go through these massive traumatic cuts, if employment stays high, which not what it does, if it's going to impede their ability to grow. It's going to be a very interesting thing to watch, which we've never seen before in the in a pseudo recession, at least in the States.
Mm-hmm.
No, very, very much so. Now, I'm just curious now to think back. Do you have a from the time that you were writing this book when Connor was still really young, do you have like a favorite memory that you could share just around about those times? Like anything that just really sticks out that maybe you put in the book, or any specific thing?
I'll tell you one. It's anchored on the advice given to me from my mother-in-law, and I'll preface by saying she's a saint, and she is so adored by this family. My wife's sister, you know those candles you can get where it's like a pope and the pope's image is in the candle, or it's Jesus, or it's a saint. They made candles up with her face and said Saint Eileen on the candle. That's how much she's respected. She has 3 of my chapters are based on her advice. And one of the memories that challenges we had was we had one of those plastic gates around our fireplace mantle. And there's a nice glass case and the door, like glass doors, and you close it. And the plastic worked for about 5 months when he started walking. And then he could just like throw the cage up and like go and be like, get away from there. And my mother-in-law, we got on the phone with her. She's like, what are you doing? I'm like, we're trying to protect our $2,000 fireplace glass doors I just replaced and making sure the kid doesn't cut himself. She's like, you're being ridiculous. I'm like, what the hell do you want us to do? She's like, teach the kid not to walk near the mantle. I'm like, well, what do you think? When he goes over there, you say no. And you keep saying it and keep saying it and keep saying it, and it'll stick. And we're like, well, that's going to be a pain in the ass. We don't want to do that. Like, I don't want to yell at him every single time. So we started the advice because we had like no choice. And so we would lumber over there, get away from there. And I'm like, whoop. And so we went back and forth. We told him no 1,000 times. And soon it was hands off. It took us 2 or 3 months, hands off. Then it was the electric socket and pulling a lamp out. We're like, what are you doing? If you pull it out, you could shock yourself. If you ever hurt yourself, that could hurt. Taught him that. By the time he was, I'd say honestly, maybe 2.5, 3 years old, he could wander around the whole first floor, kitchen, oven, everything. Nothing broken, nothing smashed, no etagere falling over, nothing. And I was based on her advice, and it's in like, I forget what chapter number it is, but I sang her praises. And I told her, I'm like, you better appreciate me now because you're my damn book.
Saint Eileen.
Yeah. No, it definitely helps when your mother-in-law is awesome, and that's I can say I benefit from having a great mother-in-law as well. So we're in the same boat there.
Yeah.
Now, Kendall, I'm just going to share some information here. It's going to share where people can get access to the book. Number one, so Kendall's website is therookiefather.com. So if you're watching, it's here below, but otherwise it will be in the show notes. So in terms of getting the book, like I guess I'll say this: what are you working on now? Where can people find out more information? Is everything kind of linked back to this website, or are there other places we can find you? Yeah.
So the website has the latest articles. Has a find the book page. The book's sold on Amazon, Target, Walmart. It's on local book retail outlets like Books A Million. You can go to familius.com. So far, it's got about 60 reviews across all the retailers, so it's doing well. And the website also gives different interviews, so you can go see what different interviews I've done. I do an article about once a week, less so now, but there's plenty of content on there. And you can ping me at therookiefather@gmail.com. On Twitter is author Kendall, and Instagram is the same as prior. It's the Rookie Father on Instagram.
Awesome. Kendall, I just want to say thank you, number one, for taking the time to join us today and just share. We went a little off script. There was a couple things that came up that I know we weren't really planning on discussing, but I just appreciate you being willing to go there and and share some of that more personal stuff with us.
No, great talking to you. Thanks for having me on, Brian and Tanya. It's great talking to you.
Likewise, and for everyone who watched or listened to this interview today, thank you for taking the time to join us, and thank you for letting us disrupt your everyday.
Thanks for listening to the Disrupt the Everyday podcast. For more ways to listen, connect with us on social media. To be a guest or to partner with us, check out our link tree at Disrupt the Everyday. Join us next time for more ways to disrupt the everyday.